Hi everyone, with spooky season almost upon us, today we're going to do something very different in the spirit of Halloween. What I'm about to present to you is a slightly modified version of a presentation that I gave at the Australian National Maritime Museum about Australian ghost ships. I've divided it up into a couple of parts, so you don't need to watch it all in one sitting. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to look at some Australian ghost ships, mysteries, and just some scary stories in the spirit of Halloween. I'm also trying something different, so there's going to be some little animations and graphic images. Let me know if you like this, and I'll try and incorporate more in projects down the track. So, let's begin our discussion about Australian ghost ships and maritime mysteries. And we're going to begin with this chap. When I was doing my research for this presentation, one of the most consistent stories that came up was that it would be a group of divers that would be down there exploring a wreck, and then in amongst the wreckage, completely randomly, there would be a skull just sitting there on top of the wreck. In my research, one of those stories that I could corroborate came from the wreck of the Cheviot, which was an Australian steamship that got wrecked on a beach that now bears its name, Cheviot Beach. Australians will be quite familiar with this beach because in 1967, the Prime Minister of the day, Harold Holt, decided to go for a cheeky swim. And he went missing, and remains missing. He has never been seen since. And I constantly say to everyone, if the weather conditions can destroy a steel steamship, just imagine what they could do to a human body. One of the most notorious ghost ships, or rather ships involved in ghostly spectral paranormal events, certainly in the last 50 years, is a ship called the Alkimos. This ship was one of 2,710 Liberty ships built during the Second World War. Outwardly, it was an unremarkable ship, just one of those many vessels of its type. Completed in 1943 as the George M. Shriver, shortly thereafter it was transferred to the Norwegian Merchant Marine, where it was renamed the Viggo Hanstein. What is less well known is that the Norwegian Merchant Marine allowed women to serve on board their ships, essentially frontline duties. And in 1944, as part of the crew, was Canadian radio operator Maud Steen. And on this day, while the ship was docked, one of the ship's crew members made advances towards her, and she rejected them. In a fit of rage and anger, this particular crew member went and drank his sorrows, and filled with alcohol and fury, he then grabbed a gun and shot her in her left temple. Having realized the magnitude of his action, he then turned the gun on himself and took himself out of this world. Both are now buried in military cemeteries in Italy. Aside from this unfortunate and tragic event, the ship's wartime career was relatively uneventful. In 1953, the ship was sold to a Greek company and was renamed the Alkimos. It turns out that Alkimos was one of the best friends of Achilles, the famous demigod of Trojan War fame, and the chap that gave us the Achilles heel. Between 1953 and 1963, the Alkimos traded, and in 1963, it ran ashore off a town in Western Australia called Yanchep. Now, through a variety of factors, be it storms, bad luck, circumstance, despite many attempts to move the ship off, and even at one time actually getting the ship off the beach, The ship ended up breaking its tow and drifting and smashing into a reef further beyond Yanchep. Where it ran aground, and remains to this day, that area is now a flourishing suburb that carries on the name of the ship, Alkimos. Back in the 1960s, however, this was still the wilderness. Locals in the area used the wreck as a weekend getaway, as a place to do some offshore fishing, and to do the things that adults do in their adult time. Before the wreck ultimately collapsed, and to this day, while you can still see elements of the wreck, for example the engine bed and the engine itself, and the steering quadrant are above surface, and on calm days you can dive on this wreck. But before the wreck ultimately collapsed into the water in the late 90s, between the late 60s and the early 90s, this ship was a local landmark, rather the wreck was. And as people would stay on board, they would come back and report mysterious happenings and things going bump in the night. Things different from the wind, the waves, and the sheer fact that they were stuck on a rusting ship in the middle of the ocean. These accounts coalesced into the identity of a ghost that seemed to enjoy stomping around on the rusting corridors and cabins of the ship. The ghost of the Alkimos got a name. His name was Henry, and through digital technology and the accounts provided to us, here is a reconstruction of Henry. Now, based on what I could provide digitally, and depending on the accounts that you read, he was either too tall, so his head was basically through the ceiling, or he did not have a head and he just basically stomped his way through the ship's corridors and cabins. And being a ghost, didn't have to worry about opening and closing doors, he could just simply walk through them. Now, while being an intimidating presence, he wasn't exactly the most violent of ghosts, although people who did have an experience definitely had a very chilly and bad sensation from it. What is interesting is that since the ship has collapsed and become a total wreck, his spirit hasn't transferred to the suburb. He seems to have been stuck on board the ship. There are no accounts of Henry haunting the beachside cafes or the houses that now line the area. So should you visit the wreck of the Alkimos, who knows, maybe you might be visited yet again by Henry.